Hey folks, you're listening to the Money Date Podcast, a podcast that my husband and I launched to help young couples get real about their money.
We'll ask our friends and a few strangers all the uncomfortable and awkward questions about how they handle their money.
All the gory details, and hopefully a few tips and tricks along the way that you can pick up and use in your own relationship.
Welcome to today's episode of The Money Date. We're back after a short hiatus and joined on today's show by Jen and Ezra. Jen is a writer and a journalist, and Ezra is a former carpenter turned nurse. Welcome to the show, guys. Why don't we start the conversation with you, Jen? Tell us about how you and Ezra met.
So the way we met is I had been through a kind of harrowing breakup, as happens frequently in a dating life. And I was invited to Kingston by a couple of writer friends of mine to come up and hang out and kind of just like have a little bit of a writer's retreat, but also
sounds amazing.
Yeah, it's really fun. I do a little talk about memoir writing. My first book was a memoir about going to weddings. So I came up here and stayed with a friend of mine. And I think the second night I was here, our other friend who runs a writer's studio up here invited us to dinner. And before dinner, we went to Sari's apartment for drinks. Meanwhile, Ezra had long-term plans with Sari's husband, Brian. Maybe you should take this part.
This feels very destined. I'm like hooked.
So Sari was a classmate of mine when I was in school for journalism, and I had not seen her in many years, and chance ran into her up here. I did not know she lived here. We sort of reconnected, and I became friendly with her and her husband again. I had helped her husband. He was downsizing his storefront business, a computer repair place, and as a thank you for helping him move things and hang shelves and resituate his storefront, he invited me out to dinner and drinks. And it happened to be the same night that...
Right, but wasn't it that it was postponed and then it became the same night?
Right. It was supposed to be earlier that week.
So it was like extra fortuitous or something. But
wow.
So yeah, we're hanging out drinking before dinner, and Brian and Ezra walk in, and there was just like that kind of weird, magical, like...
double take.
Honing in on this person who suddenly walked into the room. Yeah. And I was like extra fun and charming that night for some reason.
She was. She was.
So it really worked. But I got very drunk. He got
I like how the charm continued, huh?
I was definitely like, look, I'm free. I'm partying. This is a cool person. Oh, so what happened was we all went our separate ways to dinner. And at that point, Sari, who feels, and I think she correctly feels, that she's something of a matchmaker, Yenta, like has like so many stories of married couples that she's brought together. She then was like, all right, we're getting everybody back in the same room, and so she did a lot of, we all then ended up after our separate dinners coming back to the apartment and hanging out for hours. And then Ezra and I ended the night like drunkenly singing Harry Styles songs in his
That's
car.
when you know it's love.
And I couldn't find, this is terrible, but I couldn't find the address or like where I was staying. So we like slept in his car for like 3 hours, and then finally,
that's hilarious.
In daylight, I was like, oh, it's there. And like a block away, and he dropped me off. So
That's incredible.
So then, I like didn't know if he'd ever contact me again because I seemed like kind of a monster, maybe. I don't know. But then like a day later,
I went to see your talk.
He showed up at my talk.
Oh.
And he walked in and I was like, oh my gosh, like he's the one guy in this room. It's like this beautiful wine bar. Like everybody's drinking rosé and like has their like memoirs about dating and
yeah.
and it's all Ezra. Women. And then he's like, I'm here. It was
That's
very
amazing.
sweet.
Nice. One last sign of how fortuitous this all was. I had never done any internet dating, and a couple days before I met Jen, I said, oh, let me just try it. And I forget which one it was, maybe OkCupid or something. I downloaded it on my phone, and I, looked around a little bit. And then I met Jen, and the very next day deleted the app from my phone.
That's amazing.
I knew I did not need to go that route.
You did not have to suffer.
That's an incredible story.
It really is.
So what happened next? How did you guys end up engaged?
I was living upstate and she was in Brooklyn. And so immediately you're talking about the long distance.
We met in April, and I started kind of coming up to Rosendale, where he was living at the time, and staying for a weekend, and he would come down to Brooklyn, and we did a lot of back and forth, and it was actually extremely nice. And this maybe weighs into the money conversation. Like, we met when I was 40. So like, I had a long time of being really independent and living on my own and liking my own space and like really relishing alone time. Yeah. And so being long distance, which I know you guys were long distance for a while.
I don't recommend it.
At some point you're like, no, we need to be in the same place.
Yes, exactly.
In the early stages, it gave an opportunity to sort of like feel free and not like so high stakes right at the beginning. I don't know. It just felt really nice. There was no like game playing or fake stuff.
Oh, that's amazing.
So
go Ezra.
It helps that he'd never been on OkCupid or Tinder, I guess. Yeah, and then we kind of started spending more and more time, I think, together. And then we started sort of looking for a house to buy. Ezra would buy the house, but I really started getting involved in that process and like, where would we want to live? And presuming that we would this would be our house. So I think that pushed us to really, I don't know. It's like, we didn't really have a talk about getting super serious, but it was just part of the arc that was going to happen. Yeah. That was kind of presumed, I think, which maybe is also a thematic reality for us with regard to how we do money. This might be terrible, but like implicitly there's a sense of agreement and understanding that we're going in the same direction. So there wasn't really the need to be like, wait, are we definitely moving in together? What are we doing? I did feel a lot of just complications about my apartment in Brooklyn because it's like this symbol of my independent singlehood. And now Ezra's daughter is living in it. And I'm so glad that that can happen. And at the same time, I'm like, but my baby apartment, totally. It's weird. It's just a strange feeling. And then afterward, I kind of was like, wow, I just like moved into your house and I guess we're living together. And you were like, yeah, of course.
Did the conversations around money and finances come up explicitly? And if it did that come up before or after you considered moving in together, and Ezra, in your case, purchasing a home?
We kind of tiptoed around it, but at the same time, it wasn't like something we needed to really tiptoe around in that money between us always felt kind of just very natural. You know, Jen and I enjoy going out and eating good food, and we enjoy having some drinks with our good food, and you know, our bills at the restaurants are handsome looking bills a lot of the time. And I feel like we never really discussed like who's getting dinner this time, or we never split anything. It's always one person pays and then somebody else pays. And it's always been very organic. Like we've never said, well, I got all the meals last week, why don't you get this one? It's just sort of, it has sort of a easy breezy kind of feel, like there's an assumption that it's all even without doing any accounting.
I don't want to sacrifice going out to a nice dinner because that's something I really enjoy. I mean, we've also made different amounts of money at different times, and we've both been very aware of that. There are times when, you know, if I just sell a book, I have a lot of money all of a sudden, and I shouldn't spend it all at once. But I kind of want to celebrate. For me, it's always like I want to pick up the tab sometimes so that this isn't just one person's burden. And also, Ezra doesn't think I'm just like some flagrant spender who's taking his money and like wanting to do all these things. I want to buy us dinner a lot of the time too. Right. I want to buy us food for the house. We kind of alternate that as well.
And counterpoint to that, I'll say that I had some big financial struggles running my own business for nearly 20 years. You know, there were times when it was great and there was times when it was a struggle. I got into making furniture because I had gone to art school and I liked making things. Yeah. What I never learned and had no background in was making money or managing the money of a business. So the businessman side of running a business was completely foreign to me, and I really just tripped my way through it. Yeah. And there were some years by happenstance I made a lot of money, and other years oh, I really, should have been skilled in profit and loss analysis, all that stuff.
Yeah.
So, and then I went through a divorce and was feeling very, very poor. So for me, like to have this career change and suddenly be on somebody else's bankroll and, a retirement account and paid time off, like all of a sudden I felt like I was reborn financially. So it felt really good to me to have some money in the bank and, be freely spending on all the delicious food that we're eating.
Well, also a thing happened where I think we'd been dating like maybe less than a year, maybe 8 months or something. And Ezra got a new job. Yeah. So he'd been at a job where he was making a much more static kind of salary and less.
And much lower.
Yeah, a lower salary. Mm-hmm. And I think that may have been more of a struggle, although you didn't really share it with me at that point. Just like feeling like you can't save money. And, when you're in like the early stages of dating someone, you kind of want to like really live it up.
Not show any of that. Yeah.
Yeah. And not be like, oh, actually, we should, do you have to get the lobster or whatever? So then he switched jobs, and that allowed him larger salary to start with and the ability to work extra shifts if he needed to make even more money. Meanwhile, it's kind of funny because like I was going through a bit of a financial, I think I had a lot of money when we first met. And then like last summer, suddenly I was really broke just because of the way that freelance and book stuff and everything came in. Yeah. And so one thing that also is organic and nice so far is that one of us is kind of doing well while maybe the other isn't doing quite as well sometimes.
Yeah.
So
we're both doing well.
Now, we're doing fine. But having that partnership where one person can kind of take on a little more if necessary feels very beneficial, especially for, I've been like making my own money for a really long time.
Right.
And now the idea that, oh, wow, well, we have a much more stable system with the two of us. Yeah. Just because, this is what marriage or partnership is, right?
Yep,
like,
totally.
Which is interesting to me because, not to disparage my former marriage, I like that. With Jen and I am, quote, the regular money earner. Like I get a paycheck every other week and it's reasonably the same amount. And Jen's money comes in a bucketful here and a bucketful there. Yep. My last marriage, I was that person who would get the bucketful of money here and there, and she was the steady earner. Mm-hmm. However, it never had this kind of easy assumption that it's still equal.
Yeah.
Like there was much more pressure on me to up
Make
my
sure
game.
You made ends meet. Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot more like if we didn't have as much money that month or that week, it somehow fell on my shoulders as a blaming kind of thing. So there's a little bit of PTSD from that, which I have to say that in this relationship, it's been completely quelled.
Aww.
And
that's nice.
It is not something
I'll have to traumatize you in other ways.
Yes, we'll find a way.
Make up for the slack.
She'll make up for it. Yeah, exactly.
Well done.
So I'm really curious because you guys have talked around this a little bit, and I want to dive into it a little further because each of you is sort of like, an independent woman later on in her career and her life, finding a partner. And Ezra, you, somebody who's been through this once already and has seen sort of some of the tough parts of marriage. Yeah. How did that change how you guys decided to bring your finances together? Because it sounds like, if I'm hearing you correctly, you seem to own some parts of it, Ezra, and you seem to own some parts of it, Jen. And then there seems to be an understanding that if anybody is short, somebody else will step in and cover.
This came up just recently. We got a bill for the house and there was an underpayment of escrow. And getting a bill like that is always like, oh my God, this is not something that you had accounted for. Why is this happening? And I think also you play off of each other. So if one person's reaction is like, oh my God, this is the worst. The other person's like, no, it's going to be okay. Right. So I was no, it's going to be okay. And I was like, well, we can use my money too. And Ezra was kind of like, it's really important to me to be able to take care of this house myself. So there's a lot of emotion in that. And, it's also like opening a letter like that at like 10 at night or something. And you're just like, what?
Yeah.
So part of our division of equity and the way we deal with money has to some extent also been like, Ezra owns this house and I own the apartment in Brooklyn, and they're approximately worth the same amount.
Yeah.
So there's kind of this sense of like, upon marriage, joining that equity, like we're both bringing the same thing to the table, kind of.
Got it.
And our salaries also aren't that far off. You know, yeah, if I like make a major motion picture, perhaps suddenly I'm bringing in $1 million or something.
Give it time.
Which I would never complain about.
Right.
In terms of, you know, your question about how we decided to work our money.
Yeah.
And you were mentioning Jen being this, you know, independent writer, independent person, and me, previous marriage, combining income into one bank account and feeling like I was micromanaged about what I spent.
Yeah.
I felt it was important for me to want to have my own money, and Jen feels very much the same. So we are basically not combining our incomes into one bank account. We're maintaining separate accounts. I have not done my part, but I think Jen set up like a spreadsheet. We're going to, this is like future planning. We're going to be like looking at where our money falls and what kinds of things we're spending. And I think that from once we both sort of get an idea of really where our monthly expenditures are going, that we're going to be able to easily sort of break up like, okay, well, since I'm spending this much, why don't you pick up the electric bill and the water bill, and I'll get the heating bill and this, and keep it going that way. But the idea that we're having separate accounts, but we are paying for the collective things is kind of great to me. And we recently had a discussion as we're, you know, getting closer to this tying of the knot, and her finances becoming my finances and her equity becoming my equity, and vice versa. We came up with an agreement that, like, you know, there's no questioning if she wants to buy something for herself, a dress, a bag, you know, whatever it might be.
A piece of machinery.
A piece of machinery, right. We kind of set like a arbitrary but maybe significant $1,000 limit, where if one or the other is going to make $1,000 or more purchase for kind of like a personal item, that we share that.
We have to talk about it.
That's awesome.
It's like the barest of rules, you know. But important for us because I think I don't want to have the sense that someone else is like breathing down my neck telling me what I can and can't buy.
Yep, totally.
That would make me so angry. And I also prefer to run my finances. I have a very organized, but like probably to anyone who's really like an accountant would look at the way that it is and be like, what are you doing? But it works for me. And so I don't want someone to tell me what I should and shouldn't be doing. And similarly, he does not want anyone to tell him what he should and shouldn't be doing. And right now we're in a state where we are, I think, making enough money that we can afford to buy our sort of luxury items that we want. It would be different if like every day we were like, I want this $1,000 purchase. It doesn't happen that often. And usually it turns out to be something that's good for both of us. Yeah. So like, I just bought this desk that I'm looking at right now, and it's gorgeous. And we were on Shelter Island, and we go to this furniture store we love, and we found it. And it was a spur of the moment purchase, but we were both there and we talked about it, and we were in agreement that we should have it. And it's now this beautiful object in our home that helps us both be more organized, ideally. I guess it would be more of a problem if one of us was like, I just want to go gambling and I want to gamble my $1,000 tonight. It's also very helpful to write about money and to be talking to people like you guys and hear about how communication is really more a key than anything else, it feels like. So having it open to not feel judged and to talk about it is much better than, say, just like saving a bunch of money, because it's not about saving the money necessarily. For us, it's about being able to do the things we want to do, and money is freedom. Do we have the money to spend on what we want? Can we be living the kind of life we want? What do we need to do that?
I'm thinking back to Save the Date, which is your first book. This is a memoir that explores what you've learned about marriage, relationships, and yourself through 17 key weddings. And weddings and marriage is a turning point for some. You know, the discussions go from being very casual to being very formal. And I'm wondering if either of you have talked about or thought about what changes about the way you handle money once you get married.
once we moved in together, we did really start having those conversations, even maybe earlier, about like getting married. Is that something we want to do? Why do we want to do that? How do we want to do that? What would it look like? No one really gets that like crazy surprise engagement out of the blue. No one wants that. You're talking about it all the time in everything that you do and say. And I don't know, what do you think about?
I'm just considering the idea of like, what makes people compatible. I think that Jen and I, from the beginning, felt very compatible. There's a few minor points that we slightly differ on. The time we spend together and the things we like to do and the conversations we have are all very organic. And like, for some reason, I think our ideas about money and how we do money together were naturally compatible from the beginning. Like, I don't think there was never any real, like, these are things we have to wrestle into place.
Right.
A relationship work.
I mean, it helps also that
call us lucky.
I don't have kids, and we're not going to have kids, because I think that changes a lot of the money pressure. And Ezra,
interesting. You
and
know
Ezra,
that going into it.
Yeah, Ezra does have Daisy, his daughter, and Quinn, his 15-year-old son. And I think it's awesome to have them in my life. Like, they're my kids, basically. Not biologically at all, but just like they're the kids I get to have in my life. But I think when you start thinking about having your own children, I just think that would put so much more stress on our savings ideas and where we're putting money. And we might still be on the same page, but it does give us this freedom to be like, well, what do we want to put money into? Okay, great. Like, we share this house and this apartment. We can put money into that. We can keep building our own equity. We can go on great vacations. But we're not saving for someone's college necessarily. Right. So I think that helps. And then back to the idea of save the date and marriage. I mean, we definitely, like, we don't want to have a really expensive wedding. And we did go through some conversation about like whether we wanted a prenup or not. And Ezra, I don't really have strong feelings about it. Ezra has sort of strong feelings about it.
I think the idea of the prenup, to me, has always reeked of distrust.
They have a prenup.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay. That's totally fine. No. You guys are totally allowed to feel that way. People feel very passionately about it. People feel passionately about how you merge your finances,
Yeah.
Obviously, right. That's a personal feeling, and that, why am I entering into this situation with the idea of like, well, this is how we pull out of it if and when we're ready.
Yeah.
I'm somebody who,
having been divorced, that's, you want to feel a certain way about this new situation.
Yes.
I think because we're largely on the same page with money and we have similar assets and perhaps similar liabilities to some extent, it's less worrisome. And I also feel like, I don't know, like I was less worried about a prenup and more concerned about, okay, we need to get like our beneficiary stuff in here. We need to, if I die, you get the house or you get my apartment. If you die, I get the house. Not any confusion about that, particularly like when you're engaged, and you don't.
Right. And probate. You don't want to be stuck in probate. Totally.
So that stuff, like I feel like a will that explains how you want things to pass down is very important.
Yep.
And also because Ezra has children, how does that function in how we leave our money and stuff like that. So all those morbid questions I'm concerned with, and I want to make sure that we just lay it out in a way that's very clear.
Stepping back a little, one thing that I'm hearing so clearly from you guys is, it sounds like you've come into your marriage in some ways having worked through a lot of the money turmoils that we might go through as individuals, trying to navigate debt, trying to almost be bankrupt and bounce back from that. It sounds like you've gotten through that. So when you guys came together, you were in a more stable place in terms of finances, and that's allowed you in some ways to have a more productive and open, and it sounds like a more honest conversation about money with each other.
Definitely a benefit to being old.
Yeah. Well, hey, wisdom here is gained. So I'm actually really curious. One of the things that's really different about being further along in that journey is that you have sort of quote unquote things that come with you. Ezra, you have 2 kids from a previous marriage. And one of the interesting things that's happening here is your older daughter is renting Jen's apartment in Brooklyn. I'm really curious how you guys navigated that decision. Like, how did that even come up? How did you even feel about it? Because I think about it from my point of view. And if Delmar said that to me tomorrow, I don't know how I'd feel about it. And I was actually just really curious to hear that story.
I think it was my suggestion.
It was, yeah. Well, it all happened around the time that we were buying this house and you were going to be moving up here. Jen had rented her apartment for a couple months over the summer.
Yeah. And,
we were realizing like, well, if we're living in the same place for most of the time, does it make sense to be paying full price for both places?
Yeah.
The idea of having my daughter there is that she would have this wonderful place. She had gone from, some version of a dorm to some version of a railroad apartment, with 3 incredibly slovenly guys to having her own place, in a swankish area.
Feels like a rite of passage.
Yeah, exactly. So now she's like in a swankish single apartment. But at the same time, Jen, when she has business in the city, or Jen and I, when we want to go down to parties or other events in the city, we still have a place to stay. So
that's fantastic. Yeah.
It's really kind of the best of both worlds. Financially, it's kind of funny because, my daughter is 20. She's in her 3rd year of college. Yeah. And how is she supporting herself? Well, mom and dad are supporting her basically, right?
Right.
We've talked a little bit about like, well, we should probably charge this much so that the expenses that we do have to put into the apartment are an easier burden for us. But every time we talk about raising the price, it sort of comes back around like, well,
who's going to pay for that?
That kind of comes out of my pocket.
Yeah.
But the magical thing about this is that, I don't know if she's listening or not, but my daughter's mom and I basically split the college expenses.
Right.
She did very well in high school and got into an honors program at Brooklyn College, which gives her free tuition all the way through. So it's really just living expenses in New York,
fantastic.
in New York, which is not nothing, obviously. So mom pays the rent, which, however you divide the money in half, if she's paying the rent to Jen, then I'm not paying some kind of weird payment to my fiance, so that my daughter can live in her apartment, so that our shared finances get all mucky. So the mom pays the rent, and I'm putting air quotes that you can't see. I pay her, food, bills, living expenses. But my parents actually had set up a college fund for Daisy, and my half is coming from my mother. So it is conveniently removed from my budget.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Yes.
That's an incredible setup. And how did you guys, how did you even work through this? Because there's so many pieces here that could be hot button topics that, could throw you for a loop.
So what happened was over the summer, actually, the woman I had in the apartment, she didn't shut me out. We also had this arrangement that I might come back, and if I need to come back, I can stay here. But the problem is that my apartment is extremely small, and there's a 1-bedroom sort of nook, and then there's there was a tiny couch at the time. We've since upgraded the couch into a bigger IKEA bed type of thing. So but you're still kind of sleeping really in someone else's space.
Thank God for IKEA, by the way.
Yeah. This woman who I had rented to, she was going through a rough time, and she was a friend of a friend. And so I basically was if you can just pay me enough to pay my mortgage, then I will pay the maintenance. And that deal had kind of been established in this previous situation. And then
interesting.
I was I could probably rent my apartment for about double what this is.
Mm-hmm.
But I also don't know if I want a stranger in my apartment.
Right.
And I did want the ability to keep going back. So I just took that same plan. I was okay, well, if we can get the mortgage covered, then I will continue to pay the maintenance. So that's kind of how it worked. But the problem is that sometimes I have complicated feelings about it, because when I do go back, it's not like the same as what my apartment was to me before.
Totally.
Yet at the same time, and then I'm always, I kind of just in my mind, I'm like, sorry, there's a fire siren.
Every day at noon.
Okay, now it's stopped. It's just droning slowly out. The other thing was, when that happened last summer, we had just moved in. I knew I wanted to be here most of the time. And also I was financially in a bit of a bind with, if I can have someone else helping me cover my mortgage, that's going to really help a lot with the stuff that I'm working on and getting me through this situation. So now Daisy being in my apartment and having that covered, really has been financially helpful in terms of things like, I was carrying a little bit of credit card debt, and now I'm paying off that credit card debt. And so it's really a nice thing, but then just emotionally sometimes going back and being like, oh, this isn't really where I'm living anymore. That's just a weird, and I don't know if it would be remedied if someone was in my apartment paying, $2,500 a month. And I think I still would feel that way. So it's nice. It's ultimately really nice to be able to be a part of the family in that way, I think. I'm offering something and bringing something to the table by letting her live there. So I think that helps me feel good about it.
I love that, the way you looked at it that way. That's, I think, an incredibly positive way to sort of look at the whole situation.
And I think, going back to the hot button topics that you mentioned earlier, going into this arrangement, Jen was apprehensive, because this isn't just my daughter, but it is my ex-wife's daughter also, who is part of the financial arrangement. So now you're getting into a muckier area where there's somebody else who's also going to be making financial decisions, financial complaints, financial contributions. And, although my relationship with my ex-wife is excellent in terms of, how we work around the kids, but it's always, that now there's a third party that is part of the conversation.
Right.
Absolutely.
And even in the beginning, offering the apartment to rent for Daisy was a slight increase from what she was paying previously. So there was some pushback. I don't want to pay more money for a place, but here's a place that's, she's got her own apartment and safer neighborhood.
And it's worth this much. And it was well, it doesn't matter how much it's worth. This is how much we're going to pay. And so there was kind of a weird negotiation there.
Which was mostly on my end. But I was coming back and reporting to Jen, this is where our negotiation is now, and what can I bring back, and what can we talk about? So
totally. It's so interesting to negotiate with your own family in some ways, right? That must have been a tough place for you, Ezra.
It certainly was. And it also brings me back into the economic fold of dealing with my ex-wife. As I had previously said, there was, a fair amount of stress and tension there. It sort of adds some anxiety to me to be going back and dealing with her on that level, because for the most part, the financial arrangement around the kids has been very easy. And in a way, it's almost been the way Jen and I work our money together, where it's sort of an organic distribution. There's no child support payments on either side. We just sort of contribute equally for the kids. So that's been kind of nice, but this added a whole nother
I guess it could have been really bad. But I think the truth of it too is that even if something is good, it's often a bit of a compromise. So I knew that I wanted to mostly be upstate, at least for a while. And that brought me all kinds of weird feelings about giving up my Brooklyn life and giving up my independence. But what would make more sense? To have someone I love as a family member in my apartment, or to rent it out to someone who's going to pay a lot of money? I would prefer to have that sort of family connection and continue to build my relationship with Daisy through my apartment in a way.
So Jen and Ezra, we are at the end of our conversation, and we like to close out our podcast by asking couples what we refer to as a rapid fire section. And these are a series of questions we ask each of you to write your answers down to before we start recording. And so you each have your answers, and you haven't shown each other. And we're going to ask you those questions now to share with our audience. So I'll ask you the first question, and Ezra, will start with you. If Jen won $1 million today, what would she do with the money?
A house is a forever project. We want to redo this and do landscaping here and do that. I think she would want to throw a bunch of money into making those projects happen. I would imagine that she would want to pay off all of her debts and possibly, pay off mortgage so that we have less and any less overhead coming through, and also taking us on a vacation to an overwater bungalow in Fiji.
Okay, very nice. Very
Yours
specific.
is so much better. Yeah, that's totally what I would do.
That's amazing.
That's wonderful. Did he get all of it, or did he just get the bungalow right?
Well, the bungalow would be amazing. I actually was like, I thought, should I give my answer now?
Yeah.
Yes.
I just had restore the barn. So one of the things, we have this barn in the back of our house, and it needs a lot of work for it to be like a functional place where Ezra can go back to making furniture sometimes and do other things. And we also have this grand idea of it possibly being like a writer's workshop at some point.
Beautiful.
But so I just put all of our $1 million into that.
That's a nice barn. Wow.
But I think we could probably do that and all of the things you listed. So
Yes.
Beautiful. So let's go to the next question.
I guess I did it wrong. I was supposed to say what you were going to do.
Yeah.
No, that's okay. I actually really like that you answered it that way. You were like, our million. We're going to like, forget Ezra's million. It's ours now.
Right.
So the second question is, what's one purchase that your partner has made in the last year that you're still trying to understand? Jen, why don't you go first?
So I couldn't think of anything really that I'm like grappling to understand, but he buys random stuff on Amazon all the time. So something random on Amazon that I don't know about.
What's a random thing you bought recently that you're
like weird bits of machinery, or like some kind of saw, and I know that he has a place and purpose for all of this. I just don't exactly know what it is.
Yeah. So when I basically sold my business, or certainly all the equipment for my business, to help fund me going back to school. And I had a very capable workshop. And I had a number of large machines, so I sold all that off, and now I have some remorse. I mean, all those machines are bigger than I would need now for what I would like to do in the near future. But I think I'm slowly clawing my way back toward having a functional stable of machines to make things again.
Yeah.
So,
and I
but I don't have that stable to actually do it in yet.
That's why
so
we need the barn.
Jen's probably saying he's collecting this stuff, but how is he going to use it? Yeah.
And
but really, for that one, there was nothing that I'm like, I don't understand why you bought this.
Right.
So
Yeah. And so my answer for Jen is a blue and gray striped fake fur coat, which is
what?
I shouldn't say fake. I should say synthetic, right? Fake sounds bad. So, but here's the thing, and this is why it's a WTF purchase for me. I like my jeans and I like my t-shirts. I'm not really very fashion conscious. I mean, I'm conscious enough to know that I don't look like a slob and that I'm not poorly put together, but I like purchasing nice items of clothing is not anything that's ever been on my list of things I want to spend my money on. So, for me, like a purchase of for me, a significant amount of money for something that is like an occasional thing that, I mean, I love it. It's like, I've never said this to you, but it's like a Dr. Seuss coat for me. And you look fantastic in it. And it is, but to spend that amount of money on something that's like an occasional fashion accessory.
Do you know how much it costs?
It's like $450. Oh, was that about right?
No, it was more. But that coat is almost, I mean, it's more of a Brooklyn coat than an upstate coat, because I feel like people upstate would be like, what? Like, but
A Brooklyn coat versus an upstate coat.
it's more of a city coat. It's really
That
cool.
makes sense.
It is very cool.
Anyway,
Okay, so you must send
it
us
probably
photos
is-
of
it's a bit
Gidget and
ridiculous.
the coat after this conversation.
Yeah.
There is such a thing as a Brooklyn coat. You know, you made that distinction, and I understand it completely.
Yeah.
All right, folks. Second to last question. Complete the following sentence. When it comes to money, one thing we cannot agree on is...
I wrote down a one-word answer to that, and that is stumped. I actually can't really think of anything that
Yeah.
really is something we can't agree on that wouldn't fall under the this is my money, this is your money, we have the under $1,000 limit, you know, you buy what you want, and I don't question anything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So I'm really stumped on that one.
I put, occasionally you think food costs a lot. Like sometimes we'll go to a restaurant and he'll just be like, wow, that's expensive. And I'm always like, maybe you're right, but also what? Yeah.
Well,
I mean, you're right.
Well, I think part of the problem with that is that, you know, food is expensive, and it's
true.
gotten more so. And
It's true. It's true.
I live in upstate New York, which we're 2 hours north of the city, and one of the benefits of living that close to the city is that we get all of the, you know, the cultural off-gassing of the city. You know,
Yeah.
we've got a lot of good stuff
It's
up here.
delightful.
Yeah.
That is an incredible expression. Is that an Ezra original, the cultural off-gassing? That is brilliant.
Tweet that. Don't worry.
Yeah, that's good.
So, you know, and also I'm of a certain age that, you know, an egg sandwich was $1.59, and you know,
right.
and still like saying when I was a kid, you know,
Yeah.
so you know, the egg sandwich is now $4.79, like for an egg and a piece of bacon. Okay. So, but food is expensive. And I think, you know, the other thing is that we also, I certainly do not want to make it sound like we are boozers, but we do like, when we go out to dinner, we like to have some drinks.
No, it's true. Food
and-
is not expensive. Alcohol is.
Yeah. And,
Yes.
you know,
Well,
when
unless
we
you're
have-
in San Francisco, where avocado toast costs $12, and
Oh
it's
my God.
Yeah.
bread and
Yeah.
avocado.
yes, right.
We were taught about money very similarly, like, don't spend all your money, you have to save your money, like, don't spend a lot on things. But my sort of inherent reaction to that was like, don't tell me what to do. I'm going to spend whatever I want on this egg sandwich. And Ezra's was, I think, more a feeling of the desire to do whatever he wanted, paired with a kind of shame and guilt about spending that much.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think that's the difference. I'm like, you know, I might eventually feel bad about it after I look at my bank account and don't have any money, but like in the time I'm like, party on, you know, let's just live. And and I don't have that shame in that moment, but I think he does a little bit. And I think that's probably the key difference of our.
Yes. My parents were very frugal. My dad was a college professor who did not make a lot of money, but managed to put away a lot of money. I think it's partly, you know, the time, but very, very frugal. You know, he was a child of the Depression, learned to save absolutely every last bit of string. We have at my mom's house, my dad passed away almost 3 years ago, but, you know, we had like buckets of Chinese chopsticks that my dad would take from the restaurant after eating because this made good kindling for the wood fire. So he saved all that. So I was brought up in a scarcity mindset, although I really wanted to spend money. You know, I dreamed of owning Porsches when I was 10 years old. And instead we drove around in a rusty Volkswagen Beetle that my colorblind father, it was a red Volkswagen Beetle, and my colorblind father used black Rust-Oleum paint to paint out the rust spots. So it was like, it was like a ladybug, and it had no muffler, and far cry from my Porsche that I wanted.
Yeah.
So,
That's
I still don't have one, by the way.
soon, as soon as Jen gets that movie deal.
Yeah. That's what we're going to spend our $1 million on.
Exactly. And last and final question for you guys is so fill in the blanks here. When it comes to money, the easiest thing for us to agree on is blank.
Just the way that we manage it organically and sort of know whose turn it is when it's that person's turn. It doesn't have to be something really studied or planned out.
Right. Well, that's a good answer. I like
thanks.
that. Yeah. So for me, the easiest thing that we have agreements on over spending money on is our nice dinners and drinks with dinner. Like that to me, even though I may say some things like, wow, I didn't expect it to be that much. It is like
it was just the only thing I could think of because we don't really have that many disagreements about it.
But it is certainly something we've always enjoyed and will continue to enjoy.
We should go out to dinner tonight.
We should. We will.
We might.
Well, fantastic. Well, I hope you guys use this podcast as an opportunity to go celebrate, given how on the same page you guys are.
The Money Date podcast is an initiative of Zeta, a company I launched to help couples track and manage their finances together. If you're inspired by what you heard on this show, you can learn more about us at askzeta.com.
And if you'd like to support the podcast, here are a few ways to do so. You can subscribe to it, leave reviews on iTunes, Anchor, or wherever you happen to listen to your podcasts, or share it on social media with your friends. And if you'd like to be a guest on our show, write to us at podcast@askzeta.com.